Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our class. We are going to finish up Chalav Akum by discussing powdered milk and when something has dairy ingredients in it, if there's any room to be lenient in that matter, and then go on to talk about Gevinat Akum, cheese made by non-Jews. So powdered milk, again, for a lot of people who are careful with Chalav Yisrael and Chalav Akum and Chalav Stam, the question arises, is there room to be lenient with powdered milk or with things which have dairy ingredients in, especially if those people, for example, in Israel, it's, as I've mentioned in last week's class, very easy to keep Chalav Yisrael, because all the dairy there, all the milk is considered Chalav Yisrael. But what happens if you're getting chocolate from America? Let's imagine M&Ms or something like that. Can one rely on, is there rooms to be lenient, or am I not allowed to have candy if I keep Chalav Yisrael? So this is actually a machloket acharonim. Okay, it's an argument by the rabbis of the last 100, 200 years. And we'll have a read of the Chazon Ish. So we'll have a look at this one in English. It's very technical, so we'll look at it in English here. He writes, powdered milk, there's no issue with cheese or butter because it's not similar. Why? For cheese is made by the separation of the water from the solid, and this separation is done through the fermenting agents that they put in the milk. Butter is made through the movement and stirring of the milk or through heat on a flame to absorb the frozen fat. And these processes are not natural for non-kosher milk, i.e. they are not effective. However, powdered milk is produced through hot, dry air, and the moisture from the milk evaporates and the dry part remains. But one can dry any liquid, and one can dry non-kosher milk just like kosher milk. Therefore, it's possible that it is entirely non-kosher milk, or that non-kosher milk was mixed in. Therefore, there was no difference between Chalav Akum and powdered non-Jewish milk. And therefore, I might say that if I am going to be strict with Chalav Stam and say I'm not going to drink that, then I'd also be strict with Chalav Akum, with this powdered milk. That's the position of the Chazon Ish. If you're strict, you're strict. If you're lenient, you're lenient. Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, on the other hand, makes a distinction. He makes a distinction between powdered milk and regular Chalav Stam. And he would say, if you say you won't have Chalav Stam, because you consider that part of the general Gezerah, general rabbinic prohibition, that's fine. But the powdered milk, he would say, was not included, not for cheese, and also not for milk. And you can read that one there in depth. And here, I'm just going to read the concluding paragraph where it says, according to Rav Frank, powdered milk is similar to butter, which many permit, though not all, in that the form has changed from natural milk and the prohibition of Chalav Akum is removed. He then combines that with the considering that today there is not usually concern for non-kosher milk being mixed in, and therefore he says even though one is strict for regular milk, powdered milk, one can be permitted, and therefore you can have people who are strict with milk, but powdered or things which contain dairy, they are lenient. Yalkut Yosef, that's Rav Yitzchak Yosef, the current Sephardic chief rabbi, who quotes his father, Rav Avad Yosef's Piskei Halacha. He holds that according to the strict letter of the law, one may be lenient, but it's proper to be stringent. And again, very easy to be stringent in Israel. And this one's a little bit easier, so we'll read this one in Hebrew. He writes there in Halacha Yud Daled, Avkat Chalav Shel Goyim, powdered milk from non-Jews, Shemarvim b'shokolad uchadome, that are mixed with chocolate and the like. im hechsher meharabanot, with a certification from the rabbinate. Me'ikar hadin, strictly speaking, ein baze isur mishum chalav goyim. This is not really a problem of the prohibition of non-Jewish milk. Provided that it's established that they're using powdered milk from cows. And therefore be permitted to eat this chocolate. However, nonetheless, nevertheless, it's good to be strict. However, for small children, one may be lenient for them to give them treats. And that's interesting here, that he allows that even for treats, where normally would say, I want to be lenient because it's necessary for growth. They're saying, no, even candies, which obviously are not a staple, hopefully not a staple in your diet, it would be fine. He continues to talk about materna, which is, milk used for babies, for formula. He says, materna ma'achal letinokot, hana'asit beta'arovet avkat chalav shel goyim, mutar litna beletinokot. You can give this milk made by non-Jews to the babies. Achar sheyadua shekayom osim avkat o mechalav parot, v'lo mechalav behema tamea, again, provided that you know it's from cow milk and not from a non-kosher source. אך אם יש לה לפניו מטרנה עם הכשר מהודר, מאוד טוב שיקנה מטרנה עם הכשר, אבל כשאי אפשר להקל בנקל במטרנה. But if he has a similar product with a better hechsher, it's better to buy the materna with that hechsher. But when it is not possible, one can easily be lenient. So here he's saying, if you have two products, one is the Rabbanut Hechsher, which has, and again, this is more in Israel, not in America. If you have a normal Rabbanut Hechsher and you have a Mehadrin Hechsher, better to buy the Mehadrin one. Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, another Sephardic Acharon, who passed away in the early 2000s, he is much more strict. And he says, just as one is strict with all products which are milk, for Chalav Akum, he considers it Chalav Akum no matter what. One should be careful also with the powdered milk as well. You can see that there in source number 42. And we write down this, and just to the conclusion of this section, it's important to note that this question is relevant not only to powdered milk, but also to any dairy products with dairy ingredients made from milk produced by non-Jews. This includes dairy chocolate, pudding, yogurts, as well as cakes, cookies, and the like with dairy ingredients. And this is why I'm saying, even for many, many people in Israel who are strict to keep Chalav Yisrael, they are lenient when it comes to this area of avkat chalav, and they will buy all these American products which have avkat chalav in them, and they're only under the Rabbanut. And only the people who wish to be strict and only buy Mahadrin, only then would it be totally Chalav Yisrael across the board. In North America and other diaspora communities, it seems that many of those who drink only Chalav Yisrael milk are not lenient concerning powdered milk. That's, for example, the Chabad custom. In Israel, although products with the Mahadrin certification will not include powdered milk or dairy ingredients, many dairy products with Rabbanut certification do include dairy ingredients, and those who accept Rabbanut certification are lenient about this as well, though actual milk in Israel is always Chalav Yisrael, as I mentioned before. Okay, that's wrapping up Chalav Yisrael. Now we're going to very briefly touch upon Gevinat Akum. Yes, Jerry. Jerry, you muted yourself. Unmute yourself, please.
What's the answer? What's the problem with powdered milk?
All of this is going back down to, are we relying on knowing the ingredients and knowing the fact that we have the FDA, the ingredients is not enough, I should say, the fact that we have FDA approved systems in place, that because of that, the manufacturer will not risk using non-kosher ingredients because he'll be fearful of getting a fine from the government, and because he's fearful of receiving a fine from the government, we can say it's as if it's Jewish, that a Jew was watching that milk. That position is held by Rav Moshe Feinstein and other Achronim, whereas, as we saw last week, there are many people like the Aruch HaShulchan and the Chatam Sofer who say no. The original Gezerah made by the rabbis was any milk which is milked by a non-Jew, if no Jew is there, even if you know it's cow milk, it's not good enough. Here we're saying the combination of knowing that it's only cow milk and knowing that it's FDA approved is enough to be considering it. And then on this small section, we're saying there are, even for those rabbis who say you can't have it for milk, there are those who say you can do it for dehydrated powdered milk. And they are rabbis like Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank and the others. Hacham Ovadia Yosef, as brought down by his son, are saying, strictly speaking, you can rely on it, but it's better to buy, to stick with Chalav Yisrael proper. Whereas we saw there, Rav Mordechai Eliyahu says, no, we never do that. It's easy to get Chalav Yisrael in Israel, so stick to it. And that's generally the Sephardic approach. In Israel, it's easy to get Chalav Yisrael for all products. So if you want your cookies and your M&Ms, you're out of luck. Don't buy those products where you can live your life without them. Whereas in America, it's so hard to get Chalav Yisrael, just the regular milk. Perhaps there's room to be lenient, even though it seems to be that the custom for those who are strict with Chalav Yisrael in America, such as the Chabad community, if you're going to be strict with the Chalav Yisrael, you might as well be strict across the board with candies and other things as well. Does that answer, Jerry, your question? Okay. Now,
okay, much clearer. Thank you.
No problem. I appreciate you asking the clarification. We're now going to jump in and talk about cheese and understand again what the issue here is. Okay? So here we're going to go and learn a Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said, Sha'al Rabbi Yishmael et Rabbi Yehoshua. Rabbi Yishmael asked Rabbi Yehoshua, Keshayu mahalchin b'derech, when they were walking along the way. Amar lo, he said to him, Mipnei ma asru Gevinat Akum. Why are the cheeses of Gentiles prohibited? Amar lo, he answered him, Mipnei shema'amidin ota bekeva shel nevela. He said, you know why it's prohibited? It's because they curdle it using the stomach of a non-kosher animal. That's the rennet. And Chazar Amarlo, he then went back to him and said, Mipnei shema'amidin ota bekevat egle avodah zara. No, only was it an animal which wasn't slaughtered properly. Even if it was a kosher animal, it wasn't slaughtered properly. They're saying this was an animal which was, they used to worship idols with it. Says the Gemara, Amar lo, Mishnah, sorry, Imken, lama lo asruha bahana'a. If that's the case, it shouldn't only be prohibited to eat it, one should be prohibited to cook it and also to derive any benefit from it. The Mishnah has a very interesting answer. Hisiula dava acher. He, Rabbi Yoshua, diverted his attention to another matter. He was like, look over there. And he quickly changed the subject. He didn't go into it. If that's the case, not only should it be prohibited to eat, it should be prohibited to cook and derive any benefit. But somehow Rabbi Yoshua was able to get himself out of that question. The Gemara then asks, my timer, what's the reason why we don't eat their cheese? Amar ula v'itema Rav Shmuel bar Abba. What's the reason? Gezerah chadashahi. It's a new decree. Ve'ein mepakpekin ba, we don't examine it. My gezirta, and what was the fact that the rabbis prohibited their cheese? There's three reasons given. Aleph, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Mishum Nikur. What are we worried about? It says puncturing. What's puncturing? They're concerned actually that a snake might have deposited its venom in the cheese, as non-Jews are not assumed to be careful about this. So here we're worried about poison. Bet Amar Rabbi Chanina, Levi she'i efshar la belo sachsuchei chalav. Rabbi Chanina says the cheese is prohibited because it's not possible to have been made without containing particles of non-kosher milk, and therefore that's the concern, that they put in non-kosher milk in there. Whereas Shmuel says, "Mipnei shema'amidin ota be'ur kevat nevela." What's the reason? Because it's curdled with the skin of the stomach of an unslaughtered animal carcass. Okay, it wasn't slaughtered properly, it didn't have proper shechita, and that's the reason. It's again the problem with the rennet, and the rennet not being kosher. And the Rambam follows position number 3 and explains, Gevinat Hagoyim muteret, cheese produced by a non-Jew is permitted. She'en chalav behema tme'a mitgaben. Why? Since milk of a non-kosher animal does not coagulate. Aval, however, b'mei hachmei mishnah, Gazu al Gevinat Hagoyim ve'asruha. Later on, the rabbis of the Mishnah, after prohibiting milk, they came and they also prohibited the cheeses made by the non-Jews. Why? B'bnei shema'amidin ota be'or hakeva shel shchitatan shehi nevela. Why? Because they coagulate it using the non-kosher stomach lining of animals they slaughtered, and their slaughter is not done properly like ours. Ve'im tomar, and if you will ask, v'alo or hakeva davar katan hu ad ma'od b'chalav she'amad bo. If you're saying, you know what are we concerned about here? This rennet, this animal lining, the stomach lining is very small. Why didn't we just nullify? Let's say it's less than 1/60th. Let's nullify that rennet and permit the eating. Answers Harambam, since the rennet is essential for coagulating the cheese. If you didn't have this coagulating matter, you wouldn't be able to make the cheese. The whole cheese is prohibited, even though it's only a very small amount. And even cheeses which are not made with rennet, but are made with grasses, or with fruit juices, kigon sarafa ta'enim, using the resin of figs, harehen nikarin b'vigina, haru miktat ha'geonim, shehi asura shekava gazu al kol gevinot ha'akum, bein she'amiduha b'davar isur, bein she'amiduha b'davar hamutar, gezerah mishum shema'amidin ota b'davar ha'asur. Says Harambam, we are strict, and we make a ruling. It doesn't matter, even if there are ways to make cheese without animal rennet. We say all non-Jewish cheeses which require a coagulating device, whether it is done through rennet, whether it's done through fruit juices or grasses, we have a lo plug. We have a rule that all their cheeses are prohibited. Whereas Tosafot in source 46 says no. In many places, he says, "B'harbe mekomot yesh ochlim otam mipnei shema'amidin otam beprachim v'gam b'gavnei gaonei navorna hetiru otam b'mkoman mitam she'amidin otam beprachim." He says there are places where they allowed it, and he said because they coagulate them with these grasses or shrubs or flowers, and the geonim of Nirvana permitted them in their place based on this reason that they coagulated them using shrubs. And as I've mentioned to you before, when it comes to the Shulchan Aruch, Tosafot, it may be important on the Gemara. When it comes to a halachic Rishon, Harambam is in a whole different league. So the Shulchan Aruch rules like Harambam, and he says, Gevinat Akum kochavim asrum mipnei shema'amidim otam be'or kevat shechitatam shehi nevela va'afilu hemiduha be'asavim asura. Cheese of non-Jews is prohibited since they coagulate it with the inner lining of the stomach of a nevela. Even if they coagulated them with grass, it's still prohibited. And the Ramah of Moshe Isserles does not bring the lenient position of Tosfot. He holds exactly like Rambam, and he writes, "V'chein haminhag," and so is the custom, even in Ashkenaz, ve'ein nifrotz geder, and one may not breach this boundary, this fence. And it's important to note, these three words, ein nifrotz geder, is a very strong halachic language, which one does not wish to deal lightly with. That's the reason why even Ashkenazim living in Israel are careful not to change their custom regarding eating kitniot on Pesach, because it's this whole phrase of ein lifrotz geder is used there, that we don't breach the boundary. So whenever the Rav Moshe Isserles, the Ramah, uses that language, the Ashkenazim are always very, very careful. So based on these sources, it seems that all cheese made by Gentiles should be forbidden, even if the ingredients are entirely kosher, which is more stringent than Gevinat Akum, concerning which we have seen some are lenient due to government supervision. I can't use the government supervision for cheese. However, the rabbis in the last 100 years discuss whether soft cheese, such as cottage cheese, cream cheese, were also included in the Gezerah. The lenient opinion, such as Rav Moshe Feinstein, holds that since these cheeses don't need any coagulation at all, they do it by themselves, they don't need anything, no grasses, no nothing, then that's not applicable to them. And he says here in source number 48, regarding white cheese, it says here, Abal, Gevinot Levanot, she'en sarich la'amida menetinas eze davar klal, de'me'atzmam mu'omadim b'meshech hazman u'mechom hamakom, einam mechlal ha'isur. However, regarding white cheese, where there is no need to coagulate them with an external ingredient, for they curdle on their own given time and the heat of the place, this was never part of the decree. And therefore, one can be lenient with soft cheeses as opposed to hard cheese. The Aruch HaShulchan disagrees and says that there should be a standard position across the board. All cheeses are out. See source number 49. The OU in source number 50 writes as follows: what kind of cheeses must be Gevinat Yisrael? Common practice based on the Igrot Moshe of Moshe Feinstein and approved by Rabbi Henkin is to follow the opinion that the Gezerah of Gevinat Akum, the decree against cheeses of non-Jews, was only declared on hard cheese, as only hard cheese uses rennet to form into curd and was therefore subject to the prohibition. Soft cheese, such as cream cheese and cottage cheese, also called acid-set cheese, does not need rennet to coagulate, as it can acidify and form on its own, and such cheese is therefore not subject to the rule of Gevinat Akum. Nevertheless, the Aruch HaShulchan and the Chochmat Adam seem to hold that even soft cheese is subject to the Gezerah or Gevinat Akum. So some people are strict, but most people follow the lenient positions of Rav Moshe and Rav Henkin. So if we go to our summary, we've now finished everything. You can see here we've now finished the unit, powdered milk, the Chazon Ish and Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, it's the same status as regular milk. So whatever you hold on regular milk, you hold on powdered milk. The Har Tzvi, Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, it's permitted because powder was not included in the decree. Plus, there are penalties for companies and no concern about actual non-kosher milk. The Yalkut Yosef says it's ideal one should be stringent. With cheeses of non-Jews, the Gemara says cheese produced by a Gentile was prohibited for 3 reasons. Some say because of poison, others say it's due to the remaining milk that does not coagulate. And the third reason is that they coagulate the cheese with the stomach lining of a nevela. That's the position of the Rambam. Is cheese made by coagulant that is kosher permitted? The Rambam says no, because most cheeses are used with rennet. We are strict even with cheeses which don't use rennet. Tosfot says you should be able to, but since Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah rule like the Rambam, the Tosfot's position is not used in mainstream halacha. Is soft cheese allowed? Igrat Moshe says, is soft cheese included in this halacha? Igrat Moshe says no, and therefore you can have cottage cheese and cream cheese. It's not an issue. Whereas the Aruch HaShulchan says it is part of the halacha, and so the Aruch HaShulchan would not allow it. That concludes our section on this unit. And next week, con bueno, we will begin looking at what requires going to the mikveh. Okay, we'll have a look at that. I want to wish you all a happy Thanksgiving, and I'll see you all next week. Take care and have a great week.
Rabbi, so
Yes, Sarah.
Thursday, are you